The first shovel of dirt hitting my chest was a soft, cruel thud, and with it came the final, gut-wrenching realization. My son, the boy I had raised from a babe, was trying to bury me alive. At 88 years old, I had survived a world war, a Great Depression, and the death of my beloved husband, but I was about to be undone by the one person I thought I could always trust. The black Dallas soil, rich and heavy, slammed against my face, filling my mouth with a taste of finality. It was not just dirt, it was the very land I had inherited from my father, the land I had fought my whole life to keep in the family. The betrayal was a physical ache, a searing pain that was far worse than the fall into the grave. Just minutes before, my son, David, had been at my side, his hand in the small of my back as we walked toward the old oak tree. His voice had been so kind, so full of feigned concern, as he spoke of a drainage issue in the back pasture. But when I looked down and saw the gaping hole at my feet, the cold, fresh scar on the earth, I understood. His arm, which had once cradled me as a child, was now a weapon, a single shove that sent me tumbling into the cold dirt. I looked up and saw not just David's face, but also the horrified, ghost-like face of my grandson, Jordan. He stood behind his father, silent and still, his eyes wide with a terror that spoke of a complicity born not of malice, but of fear. The sight of my grandson, standing by as my life was being taken, was a wound that ran deeper than any other. As my lungs screamed for air, the sound of the shovel began again, a rhythmic, purposeful beat that was a final note in the symphony of our family's destruction. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. The land had been my home for 88 years, passed down from my grandfather to my father and from my father to me. These 500 acres were more than just property. They were the very soul of our family. My late husband, Elijah, and I had spent our lives cultivating not just crops, but a rich and enduring legacy. We built our home with our own hands, the timber from our own trees, the stones from our own creek bed. The land held the echoes of our shared past, the joyous shrieks of my son, David, as he ran through the fields chasing fireflies, the sweet, quiet moments Elijah and I shared on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a living testament to a life well lived, a testament that was passed down through generations of hard work and abiding faith. I had always taught David to revere the land, to understand its value not in dollars, but in the stories it held. The stories of our ancestors who toiled beneath the same sun, the stories of our own struggles and triumphs. He used to listen with a childlike fascination, his small hand clasped in mine as we walked the fence lines. But as he grew, a profound shift occurred. His eyes, once fixed on the limitless sky above our fields, began to narrow, his focus shifting from the tangible security of the soil to the volatile, ephemeral world of high finance. He moved to the city, trading the open pastures for the suffocating glass canyons of downtown Dallas, and his connection to the land began to wither and die. The news of his financial ruin came as a quiet, devastating shock. It was a slow, agonizing descent into chaos. He had lost millions in a series of disastrous, high-stakes investments, leaving him deeply, irrevocably in debt to a man everyone in Dallas knew to be ruthless, a loan shark named Silas Vance. Vance wasn't a man who took no for an answer, nor did he believe in second chances. I had heard the whispers, the frantic, late-night phone calls from David, his voice a strained, pleading whisper. I had even seen the late-model black sedans, their windows tinted to a menacing darkness, parked at the end of our long, winding driveway. They were always there, a silent, predatory presence. For months, David had begged me to sign over the deed to the land. A team of developers, desperate for a prime piece of land on which to build a new subdivision, had offered him a fortune, an amount so vast it would not only cover his debts, but also leave him a substantial profit. "Mom," he had pleaded, his voice a frantic mix of desperation and fury, "please, just sign the deed. They're going to kill me." But my late husband's words, a promise whispered in his last moments, echoed in my mind like a sacred commandment. "Ruth, this land is our birthright. It's more than dirt, it's our story. Don't ever let it go. My refusal was a quiet, unyielding wall against his pleas, a steadfast refusal to sell a legacy for a moment of financial recklessness. To David, however, I was not a protector, but an obstacle, the final, immovable roadblock on his path to salvation. The desperation that had been building in him finally came to a head. He was convinced that the only way to get the land, to save himself from Vance's ruthless men, was to get rid of me entirely. My grandson Jordan, a young man burdened by a crippling sense of loyalty and a terror of his own, was a silent, helpless witness to his father's dark descent. He saw the shift in his father's eyes, from a desperate man to a determined, cold-blooded one. He was a witness to his father's final, monstrous decision and a pawn in his darkest game. The evening was a warm, humid Texas night, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the promise of summer rain. When David called, his voice was deceptively calm, almost cheerful, as he asked me to help him with a small job in the back pasture. A foolish, maternal hope stirred in my chest, a desperate longing to believe that this was a moment of reconciliation, a chance to mend the chasm that had grown between us. I grabbed my old gardening gloves and a lantern and followed him out the back door. The fireflies blinked in the gathering dusk, and the crickets sang their nightly song, their chorus a gentle, soothing lullaby to the world. The man walking beside me, his arm draped around my shoulder, felt like my son again, and I allowed myself to believe, just for a moment, that the past months of tension and desperation had been a nightmare from which we were both about to awaken. But when we reached the clearing by the old oak, a place where generations of our family had played and picnicked, the serenity shattered. The air, once sweet with honeysuckle, was now tainted with the unsettling scent of fresh-turned earth, a smell I knew as well as my own, but which here felt profoundly wrong. The beam of my lantern fell upon the scene, and my breath caught in my throat. A fresh mound of black soil, and beside it a dark, gaping rectangle of a hole. It was a scar on the earth, a wound that bled darkness into the beautiful night. My eyes darted to my grandson, Jordan, who was standing a short distance away, his face a mask of silent anguish and paralyzing fear. "David," I said, my voice a shaky whisper, a desperate plea for an explanation. "What is this?" He didn't answer. He simply moved behind me, and with a single, brutal shove, a force that came from the arm that had once cradled me as a child, sent me tumbling into the grave. The impact was jarring, the air knocked from my lungs in a desperate, wheezing gasp. I looked up from the bottom of the pit, my son's face framed against the pale moonlight. His eyes were not filled with hatred, or rage, or even a flicker of regret. Instead, there was a terrifying, apathetic emptiness, a cold, desolate void where the boy I had raised had once been. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, a chilling echo of his own desperation. "But you wouldn't listen. This is the only way." He picked up the shovel, its blade glinting in the moonlight like a cruel, silver serpent's tooth, and began to throw the dirt back into the hole, a frantic, mechanical motion devoid of any humanity. The first shower of cold, black earth hit my face with a finality that felt like a death sentence. My lungs burned for air, but all I could taste was the earth. All I could hear was the relentless thud, thud, thud of the shovel. The dirt was heavy, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on my chest, burying me in a physical manifestation of my son's betrayal. I watched in agony as my grandson Jordan stood by, his face buried in his hands, his body trembling with a silent, consuming horror. He was a witness, a pawn, and a victim, trapped in his own nightmare, unable to stop his father's monstrous act. The sound of the dirt raining down became my world, each thud a final, damning note in the symphony of our family's destruction. I was no longer a person. I was a memory being erased, a legacy being buried, a mother being silenced forever by the son she had loved so much. My prayers had always been simple and quiet, offered in the soft moments before sleep and in the morning light. But as I lay buried, struggling for the last breaths of my life, my prayers became a desperate, silent scream. I wasn't just praying for myself. I was praying for my son, for his soul. I was praying that this madness would stop, that a divine hand would intervene and turn back the darkness that had consumed him. It was a prayer for a miracle, and on that night, God sent one. Our neighbor, Mr. Johnson, a retired firefighter with a meticulous and unwavering routine, was a perpetual insomniac. He would sit on his back porch every night around 2 a.m., nursing a cup of chamomile tea, listening to the quiet symphony of the country, the distant cry of a coyote, the soft whisper of the wind through the tall pines, the rhythmic chirping of crickets. He had a deep, abiding love for the night, a quiet reverence for its mysteries and its solitude. But on this particular night, his keen senses, honed by a lifetime of walking into danger, picked up on a sound that was profoundly, unsettlingly out of place. It was a strange, rhythmic sound, a muffled thud of a shovel hitting dirt. It was too late for gardening, too rhythmic for an animal, too deliberate to be anything but a person. It was the sound of purpose, of hard, focused labor, and it was persistent, an intrusive note in the peaceful song of the night. A sudden, unshakable feeling, a quiet certainty that he could not ignore, told him to investigate. It was a feeling he had known many times before, a knowing that had saved countless lives during his years as a firefighter. The feeling you get when you know without a doubt that a fire has not been extinguished, that someone is still trapped inside a burning building. It was the whisper of a guardian angel, a voice that was both spiritual and deeply ingrained in his professional training. "Be a witness," the thought whispered in his mind. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, a tool of his trade even in retirement, and his cell phone. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who had spent his life walking into danger, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. As he moved closer, the rhythmic thudding grew louder, a chilling drumbeat in the silent night, a sound that screamed of a monstrous act unfolding under the veil of darkness. The closer he got, the more his firefighter's intuition screamed at him, and the more he knew he was walking into a scene of terrible human tragedy. He was no longer just a neighbor. He was a silent, unblinking witness to a crime against God and man, a witness sent by a divine hand. Mr. Johnson moved with the silent certainty of a man who had spent his life in the chaotic silence of emergencies. The rhythmic sound of the shovel grew louder and more frantic with every step he took. The air felt heavy, charged with a dark energy he recognized from his years as a firefighter, the palpable tension that precedes a tragedy. He raised his heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a sword, and the light fell on the scene with a shocking clarity that took his breath away. The beam illuminated the back of my son, David, who was furiously shoveling dirt into a dark, gaping hole in the ground. It was an image that was burned into his mind, a tableau of unspeakable horror. His blood ran cold, but his training took over. He wasn't a neighbor anymore. He was a first responder. Then he saw it. A hand. My hand. It broke free from the mound of suffocating soil, a desperate, final gesture in the darkness, a single wave of a drowning person on an ocean of earth. The polished gold of my wedding ring, the one Elijah had placed on my finger 70 years ago, caught the flashlight's beam and shone like a solitary star in the blackness. The sight of that ring, a symbol of a lifetime of love and commitment, reaching for help from the grave my own son was digging, was a sight so vile, so heartbreaking, that it solidified his resolve. "David," Mr. Johnson's voice, a sharp, military command honed by years of directing men into burning buildings, cut through the night, a sound that stopped my son dead in his tracks. The shovel clattered to the ground, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. As the light hit my grandson Jordan, his face a mask of silent, utter horror, he let out a choked cry and fled into the darkness, a broken boy fleeing a scene of unspeakable horror. Mr. Johnson, his heart pounding with a dull, insistent ache, went to work. He didn't waste a second. He began to dig frantically, his bare hands pulling at the cold, suffocating dirt, his mind focused on a single task, getting me out. He dug with a primal fury, scraping his nails on the rough earth, his knuckles turning white as he clawed at the black soil that was trying to silence me forever. The cold, heavy dirt was a physical and psychological barrier, a monument to my son's greed and desperation, but Mr. Johnson's hands were relentless. He pulled at the black earth with his fingers until he could free my face, and I took a ragged, gasping breath of air, the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was a sound that told him he was not too late, that a life had been saved. The distant hum of sirens, a symphony of salvation, began to grow louder. He had called the police on the way, his voice a frantic whisper, his words a desperate plea for help. Now, the wail of the sirens grew into a deafening roar, a triumphant song in the still Texas night. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of the Dallas PD cut through the darkness, their strobing beams turning the scene into a chaotic ballet of light and shadow. They found me barely conscious, covered in dirt, a silent testament to my son's ultimate betrayal. I was not a person. I was an artifact, a living, breathing testament to a mother's pain and a neighbor's grace. It was a miracle that had a name. Mr. Johnson, the quiet, insomniac neighbor who listened to the night and heard a mother's silent prayer. The aftermath was a blur of police lights, flashing cameras, and the cold, efficient professionalism of the Dallas Police Department. Officers swarmed the property, their powerful flashlights illuminating the grave, the discarded shovel, and my son, David, who stood silent and defeated, his hands cuffed behind his back. He offered no resistance, no argument, just a broken, silent compliance. He was a man of greed, not violence, and he had made a single, catastrophic miscalculation. He was a man caught, and now the reckoning had begun. The media latched onto the story, a sensational tale of betrayal and avarice that resonated with every family's deepest fears. The trial was swift and brutal, a public spectacle where the private horror of our family was laid bare for all to see. The courtroom buzzed with a morbid curiosity, the air thick with the weight of judgment. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like a whip, methodically laid out the case, painting a picture of calculated, premeditated malice. She described the cold, cruel plan to murder an elderly woman for her land, highlighting the depths of David's moral decay. The defense, in a desperate but futile attempt, tried to portray David as a victim of financial stress, a man driven to an unthinkable act by the relentless pressure of debt. But the evidence was too strong, too damning to be dismissed. My grandson Jordan gave his tearful testimony, a broken boy forced to choose between his father and his conscience. The sight of his trembling body and tear-streaked face as he recounted the horror of that night was an agony that ran through the courtroom, a silent, powerful condemnation that spoke louder than any words. I sat in the courtroom, a witness to my own attempted demise and to my son's public destruction. The sight of him in a defendant's chair, the man who had once been my beautiful boy, was an agony far greater than the crushing weight of the soil. It was the crushing weight of a shattered legacy. The jury was out for only 2 hours, a testament to the clear and unequivocal nature of the crime. When the foreman stood and delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts, the sound was a final, damning judgment. David's face went white, his last vestige of hope vanishing in a single word. He slumped in his chair, a man utterly defeated, his gaze fixed on the floor, 1,000 regrets etched in the lines around his eyes. The judge, a man with a reputation for a calm demeanor and a no-nonsense approach, looked directly at my son during the sentencing. "David," he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that filled the silent courtroom. "You sought to take a life for greed. You sought to destroy your own mother for a plot of land you believed would save you. The law is clear on the matter, and so is justice." The judge's words, deliberate and heavy with authority, were a final, chilling act of poetic justice. The land you so coveted, that sacred piece of family history, will never be yours. Your desire to possess that which was not rightfully yours has cost you your freedom. Now, you are sleeping behind bars for life. Today, the land is still the lifeblood of our family. I have established a trust, the Legacy Homestead, a foundation that will ensure the land is never sold. It is now a community garden and a farm for children, a place where the next generation of Dallas residents can learn the value of hard work, the power of a legacy, and the sanctity of the soil. I visit David in prison often, not to gloat or to mock, but to offer him a forgiveness that he doesn't believe he deserves. He writes me letters, his handwriting a jagged mess of regret and despair. I read him the words of Job. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. The land was nearly taken away by malice, but it was restored by a grace I can only call divine. I have found that God's justice is not about revenge, but about restoring us to a place of grace. My life, once nearly stolen by greed, has been given back to me tenfold, not through bitterness, but through a divine intervention. If you are struggling with a similar betrayal, remember that your story is not over. You have the power to turn your pain into a platform for hope and healing. Be a beacon of light in your own darkness. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.